Okay, so with the next hour, we're going to be dealing with our intermediate practice for the workshop, which I call climbing the ladder of oneness. So remember that in the first hour, we talked about a practice for developing buddhi, which is unity consciousness, partially a breaking down of tendencies of the mental body, and partially through the idea of finding a step to take in joy as a result of being fully present, showing up, being fully present, and being kind to yourself and others, opening the way to unity consciousness. So what we're going to do this hour is not going to involve any directly experiential thing. I'm not going to ask people to meditate on something like we did in the first hour. I'll be talking a bit about each of the levels of this ladder of oneness, and then I'll open up the opportunity for people to ask questions both from here in the room and for the online viewers. And the rest of our hour will be spent considering applications and questions about these different levels of climbing the ladder of oneness. So this comes under the heading of going beyond. The intermediate practices climb the ladder of oneness by applying the basic practice to each of these levels. Things, or the binaural kingdom. How do we treat our things? Are we kind to ourselves and our things? Does that seem like a ridiculous thing to say? For people who have trouble doing housework, are they kind to themselves and their things? What would it be like if you considered the act of dusting revealing the beauty of the source shining through that thing that was temporarily obscured by your forgetting to look at it? Now, I know everyone laughs, but what if that were a practice? I wouldn't recommend it as the only practice because it's a little autistic maybe in the sense of not being fully responsive to other people. And yet, we are ignorant of the fact that the things in our lives are also conscious beings in a variety of ways. Down at the atomic and molecular level, they're evolving too. And, well, it's another subject how they evolve. I mean, even if we throw them around and break them up and toss them in the trash, they're having an exciting time and that helps them grow. But, you know, the idea is loving kindness directed in any direction has a beneficial effect. And when I've spoken about working with devas and nature spirits, I've mentioned what is my own experience, and that is any deeply loved thing develops an aura that projects onto the astral plane and becomes what I call an astral birdhouse. And it invites a nature spirit or a deva to come in and live there. And as a result, there's a flow established between the subtle levels of being and the physical level of being that starts to emanate around that space, creating a feeling of peace and upliftment, of joy, of sacredness. If any of you have ever had people walk into your place and say, it's so peaceful in here, or it feels somehow sacred in here, it's because there are devas present in your things. When you dust them, you remind yourself that there are devas in the things that you most love. And the devas give back to us for that attention by making sure that the things that we treat in this way last a really long time. So, you know, the people who love their cars, name their cars, wash their cars every weekend, you know, those cars last a good long time. And it's not just from the physical attention they get. A deva comes in and holds the thing together better than it would be held together in and of its own. So this is pervasive, and you know, thinking of the sacredness of everything that you experience by showing up for it, being fully present for it, being kind to it and to yourself in your relationship, and taking that step of honoring its presence, being grateful, cleaning it from time to time, is actually an effective spiritual practice. And it might even help you do this with humans. That's a joke. All right, so we can do the same thing, extending this to houseplants or garden, which is the vegetable kingdom. The devas come with that attention and with that gratitude. Generally speaking, someone who is said to have a green thumb has that relationship with devas, and it's because they show up to plants. They're fully present to plants. They're kind to themselves and the plants, as long as they put on sunscreen. They also are involved in this interchange that we call being kind to yourself and others. And the step that you take in joy is they're yielding produce if they happen to be vegetables. So they are useful to you in some way, but you're constantly caring for them so that they can learn the most from being fruitful in that way. That furthers their emotion, their evolution. So what about the animals? Wild butterflies, birds, household pets, farm creatures, these are all beings that in one way or another we have a direct, immediate, visible effect on just from where we live and how we deal with the area that surrounds where we live. For example, planting a butterfly garden or putting out a birdhouse. With household pets, to be fully present to them is something that many people find to be a dear spiritual practice without even knowing that it is. As far as being kind to ourselves and others, they need maybe to remember that they have to be kind to other humans too. That's not exactly a joke, because I live in a very congested neighborhood where everybody has to have a dog. And the dogs are always walking around and, barking and, greeting each other. But the thing is, people who walk their dogs are attached to their dogs by a tether, a leash, and they don't necessarily make space for other people on the sidewalk. So, it's good to be kind to your dog, but you have to be kind to everybody. I guess that's one of my dislikes, sorry. So, with respect to household pets and farm creatures, I heard an amazing story by an elderly female theosophist when I was at Camp Indralaya last month. She was an equestrian, and she has kept horses all of her life and has ridden them all of her life and has realized that there is a mutual understanding that can develop between the horse and the rider that is a truly, deeply spiritual experience. We can assume on both sides. It's not just that this animal is a beast of burden. There has to be a certain amount of control exerted. It's said in the Theosophical tradition that domestic animals are at the leading edge of the animal kingdom in terms of their movement towards individualization, which means movement beyond a group soul to having an individual soul, and that they will eventually incarnate as human beings. So those of you who have a beloved dog or cat that you thinks it's a human, you're probably right. That's why it's there. It's being evolved in that direction by your showing up for it, being fully present to it, being kind to yourself and others with respect to it, and finding a step to take in joy, which is the feeding and the walking and the social interaction with other animals, other dogs, and so on. Now, what I want to point out before I go on is this is a kind of thought experiment. It's a what would happen if. It's a taking the basic spiritual practice, which is easy to remember because it's only 4 steps, and it's starting to apply it in every direction you can look. And wherever you look, it will yield benefits to you and to others. In effect, it's a way of actualizing our first object. And moving beyond doing it just with human beings, and in fact, practicing doing it with human beings with levels of being that can actually show their appreciation freely. Not that we necessarily need or should require appreciation from other human beings, but feeling the gratitude in ourselves and the joy that comes from caring for the things and the beings in our environment can often sustain us when we're dealing with situations where we're not so appreciated by other people. But let's not go so far as this statement that was by a famous poet who was a poetry editor of The New Yorker, which is very sad and very true, and it's, "People who love animals once loved people." Let's make sure that we love our way through animals back to people if we end up going that far. So then, all ages of people, from infants to the elderly, that's the human kingdom. And there are many, many levels of this. Annie Besant has something that she calls the ladder of lives, and it starts with the self. Self-care, it moves from self-care to care of family, from care of family to care of community, from community to region, region to state, state to nation, and then nation to world, and then visible beings to invisible beings, which can include the people who've passed on, and as devas and nature spirits, and then even perhaps beings completely beyond the human realm. And the idea is, can you direct yourself with the idea of being of service potentially at any or all of these levels of being? Or can you work on one of them in order to develop yourself so that the spiritual gifts come that will support you in moving to the next higher level of working? That, for me, is the true spiritual path, learning to be of service at all of these different levels. And ultimately, those four statements in the basic spiritual practice is all about service. I don't know that I need to say a lot about working with the ages of people from infants to the elderly. There are so many trials, tribulations, and joys involved with all of that. Most of us are so completely absorbed with it that some of the other levels will be neglected, and that can be a lesson too. So, show you are ready to climb the ladder of oneness within the Deva kingdom by feeling joy and gratitude for the elementals that maintain the health of your body, feelings, mind, and soul. So this is a theosophical concept that used to get a lot of attention, but I think has kind of dropped out of most people's minds. The elementals are what keep our bodies together. So whenever we're born into a new life, we take on a physical body, an emotional body, a mental body, and a causal or soul body. And each of these bodies is held together by an elemental. So we have a physical elemental that's responsible for the health of the physical body. We have an emotional elemental that's responsible for the health of the astral body. We have a mental elemental responsible for the health of the mental body. I believe there is a fourth one, which you will not find mentioned in any theosophical literature, which is the causal body that holds together the body of the soul. In my experience, these bodies need to be cared for and fed in the same way that any animal pet that we have is. And when they're neglected, they act up. How do they act up? If you look around you at just about everything that's wrong with the world, it's because elementals are acting up because people are not taking responsibility for them. The physical elemental needs quality sense experience, which means good food, exercise, enjoyable presence in the world, which is why people say take walks in the woods and so on. Appropriate use of sexuality. These things calm, soothe, feed, and evolve that elemental, and it will behave like a well-behaved horse when it gets those things. When it doesn't, it creates addictions. Addictions to drugs, addictions to extreme situations, experience, extreme sexuality, etc. So it's very important that we acknowledge and care for that elemental. With the astral emotional elemental, it needs the care of heart-to-heart connection with other people. In a sense, the physical elemental needs body-to-body connection with other people and the planet of a healthy nature. But the astral emotional elemental needs this same kind of connection, heart-to-heart with other people. If it doesn't get that, it creates operatic level emotional drama. We all probably know at least one person in our lives where they are lovely, lovely people, but they have a temper problem, and you can feel it building. You start feeling like you're walking on eggshells. You know there's going to be an explosion. You want to not be there when the explosion happens. The explosion happens, you're totally traumatized by it. It's like a thunderstorm. On the other side of the thunderstorm, everything is calm again. It's like nothing ever happened. You're left about to fall apart because you've had to deal with the thunderstorm, and you can't talk to them about it because they don't know that they did it. That's what happens with the astral elemental. So heart-to-heart connection means showing up, being fully present, being kind to yourself and others, finding a step to take in joy with the most intimate friends, with your partner, or with the people that you are closest to in your family, also with spiritual family, the people who share your beliefs and values, people that you can pour your heart out to if you need comfort, people you can listen to if they need to do the same thing. That helps keep the astral elemental in line. So then the mental elemental is responsible for what Nikki mentioned earlier as shadow logic. It acts out, what it needs is mind-to-mind connection with other people, people who share your beliefs and values. Our mental elementals are being very well fed by a conference like this. We'll go home and we'll feel like our beliefs and values have been supported and perhaps developed and furthered, and for a while that elemental won't act out. But if we don't sustain that experience, then it's likely to act out, and it usually does so in one of two ways. The first one is the loud way. That means becoming bigoted for your point of view. Anybody who's been at a Thanksgiving dinner where someone is holding forth about politics and cannot be shut up and doesn't want to hear any other views is possessed, so to speak, by their mental elemental. And self-care in that case is usually going to the other room with the excuse of watching the football game.
Watch the football game.
Yes, exactly. So with the other side, it's withdrawing from the world into things that keep the mental body active but are not useful. So endless scrolling on the phone, binge watching television, these are indications that the mental elemental is not being properly fed and is just looking for some kind of stimulation. So when you have this mind-to-mind connection with people, keep it up. You know, make some friends here that you're not going to just see next year if you come back. You know, try to stay connected. The causal elemental is, again, the one that you won't find anything about. But what I've noticed is the causal elemental needs soul-to-soul connection. And usually that involves some form of support for life purpose and service to others. This elemental, if it's not fed in those ways, ends up checking out. It doesn't want to be here. It can get so bad it doesn't want to get out of bed. I know someone who was so affected by this that not getting out of bed did not mean an act of will. It meant the hand or the arm could not be raised from the bed. That was the severity of the level of depression for that individual. So I believe the source of depression is the feeling of uselessness. And that's one of the reasons why volunteer work and service can be very useful to help people move beyond depression. What has happened is the soul elemental has wandered off and is not managing the other ones, and they're running wild. Now, tell me if I haven't diagnosed the problems of our 21st century civilization. Addictions, emotions out of control in dramatic ways, bigotry, withdrawal, not wanting to be here, and being so depressed and having such strong feelings of uselessness that it's impossible to even act because of the severity of depression. All of this can be reversed by the techniques of aligning the elementals through giving them what they need, being grateful for them, being grateful for the body and the fact that it sustains you every day, even if it complains sometimes, being grateful for this emotional level of your being. Too many spiritual practices say get rid of the emotions as distractions. But you know, we don't really learn anything, and we can't really enjoy life without them, because all the lights and shadows and all the colors that you see in a landscape or in a painting that you respond to as beauty, that is the color of human experience at the astral emotional level. And it's there to support us, and it's there to teach us. Anyway, there's a lot more I could say about that, but I won't do it just now. Same way with care of the mental level of being. We feed ourselves, we stuff ourselves with information. Everybody in our culture does. It's not just theosophists. The good thing is it's spiritual information, and so that can help feed the causal body. But the reason Annie Besant said, and Blavatsky too, it's not theosophy if you're not living it, if it's not coming out in action, is because that feeds the causal level of being, and if you're directed towards service, you're developing unity consciousness. These are the things that lead you to grow and develop and to inspire growth and development in others. So I think we'll stop there. Well, no, just very briefly. The beings in the stones, trees, rivers, lakes, winds, clouds, colors and light, landscapes, those are the nature spirits and devas of the elements. Just being grateful for the beauty of nature. Just taking any moment. All of you can try this little spiritual practice while you're here. Go outside. Be away from people. Say hello to the stones, trees, rivers, lakes, winds, clouds, colors, light, landscapes, etc. Be aware that there are beings present there. Be grateful for their presence. Sometimes you can feel their presence. If anybody wants to know what it feels like to be in the realm of nature spirits, go back to the very back of the property where the children from the prairie school have built all these little forts out of wood. Nature spirits come there because they love children. And so even though you may not actually see nature spirits in those little forts, you can feel the presence of a special energy that isn't necessarily available just out in the lawn. I mean, lawns can have it too, but that's a very different energy. It's less focused or concentrated. Gratitude to the nature spirits opens up the possibility of communication with them and even possibly working cooperatively with them. Feeling joy and gratitude for support in research and creative work. This is something I experience constantly. I have a little voice that tells me what search terms to use when I'm looking for something. I'll be sitting there and I'll be saying, okay, I need to know something, and the voice will come in, I'll put the search terms in, and I'll find impossible stuff to find in the first couple, things that show up. I consider that that's an inspiration, Deva, giving me some help, and I'm grateful for it. It really helps a lot. So know that when you are ready, whatever training you need to see, hear, and understand invisible beings, to communicate and collaborate with them or fulfill a task or mission for them, will develop naturally and organically. And once again, not that you would do this for the sake of being able to work with them. in every aspect of life. If you show up, if you're fully present, if you're kind to yourself and others, if you look for a step to take in joy, the nature spirits go, oh, that's somebody I want to play with. And then you start to learn the way of being with them. As they begin to show up for you, be fully present with you, be kind to themselves and you, and find a step to take in mutual joy with you. So what happens is, as you're living this in life, the reflection is the universe starts living a reflection of that back to you. And this can happen with people who have passed on, with the higher devas, the ones that are above the nature spirits, and even with masters and inner teachers. So you can see that this basic spiritual practice is truly basic to a lot of what's very important to us Theosophists. So that is the end of my presentation here. I'll just go back in case anybody wants to remember that slide. Questions, please.
I wanted to share with you when I was in Findhorn in northern Scotland, the devas are very visible to if you see them, you know. And what helped me, I went there 20 years ago, but it helped me bring those devas and the plants and the water and it helped me to see, and it helped me to communicate. And I too, every night, get information that the next morning I type it all up, and a lot of it comes from higher sources. And Cy Ginsberg used to be my mentor. And so on the other side, I don't know if he's feeding it or what is happening, but I get outlines, information. So I love what you put in there at the last, the information devas, you know, because it's so prevalent, you know. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours to write up some of that stuff.
Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that. Those are courageous statements to make in a Theosophical Society meeting. I am not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure there are many people in the room who really respond to that, who are not speaking up about it because it has not always been safe to do that. And I invite you to all find each other somehow by, if you happen to show up and share or notice someone else showing up and sharing that, make a connection. We need to know that that support exists. It needs to be more apparent, and that's one of the reasons why I talk the way I do, to kind of support the Theosophical Society and realizing how important that is. So,
Why is it not accepted?
there have been many situations in the past where the society has been burned by people who've come in to try to take it over, claiming clairvoyant or higher powers or higher inspiration, and then stealing, you know, people away. And so there's been an extreme cautiousness about that kind of thing coming in. But my personal belief is what creates community and spiritual family is sharing our inner lives. And one of the things that can really revitalize the Theosophical Society, in my opinion, is creating a safe space for people to share their inner lives. It doesn't have to happen in a room like this where we're doing a presentation, but it can happen in the cafeteria, and it happens because somebody has spoken up. Just as an example, at one Theosophical camp I went to, when I was talking on similar subjects, 2 people raised their hands to say, I talk to dead people. Neither of them had ever encountered anyone else who did that. Now they could talk to each other and affirm for each other what their experience was like. So, thank you.
I think one of the problems with why the society has not been or is reluctant to this is that it's really like you open a can of worms, in the sense that there are so many people who are deluded or who are, I don't know, that very disruptive. So what we need to do is not to react in that way as Kurt was saying, just shutting everything off, but have the discernment and help people have discernment. In my experience, whenever there was a person that you can see that that person is balanced and is serious, there is an appreciation of their experience. But then on the other hand, sometimes lodges get, taken over by people who are not really balanced, and that, I think, is one reason why the society is reluctant to it. We need to have a more sophisticated attitude than simply saying no or yes.
I agree with this. And I think this basic spiritual practice can help a lot. I'm not going to say everybody should go home and do it all the time and enforce it in their lodges, but it's a frame of mind that is based on theosophical principles, and it can be used in a variety of ways. One of them, Pablo and I had a personal conversation about the challenge of people coming to us with their spiritual experiences and knowing how best to support them. What I would suggest is, what would happen if, so this is a what would happen if moment, what would happen if we would say, my understanding is that one of the best ways to support and integrate your spiritual practices is, in your daily life, practice showing up, being fully present, being kind to yourself and others, and finding a step to take in mutual joy. And if they want to know more, be available to support them in that. And if they can't hear it or understand it, they have other motivations, and it's not our business to work with them. But somebody who wants to do that basic spiritual work may be able to find the inner support to do it, but also could be very well supported, I think, within our community. In a similar way, when spiritual teachers come through as a way of evaluating them, you can ask yourself, especially with respect to the teachings I'm hearing, are they being kind to themselves and others? Glamorizing them, to pull them in to create followers would not be an example of that. And so anyway, I just wanted to address that personal question we had in front of the group, because I think it might be a useful way of thinking about these things.
A question from online. I have many things that I care about that have memories, and I do dust them. She wanted you to know that. However, I need to downsize my home, and I'm having difficulty letting go. Any recommendations?
Okay, the first thing I need to say, I've said this to a few people this weekend. I have a friend who bought a T-shirt for a friend of hers that I think applies to all theosophists. And what it says is, if it's books, it's not hoarding. Somewhere that T-shirt is for sale. So, anyway, I understand that problem. And the thing is, if there are beloved people to give it away to who appreciate it, that is one venue. But it's also really helpful to bring someone in, a spiritually minded clutter consultant who can help sort things out. When I need to decide what to do about things, my own personal practice is I have an entryway at the front of my apartment. I put it out there. If I haven't thought about it in 3 months, it goes, including books. But if I do think about it, it's because there's something calling to me about it, and then I need to bring it back in. And it's astonishing how much stuff we think we need, we can actually get rid of. It's just occupying space in our heads and space in our external space. And we don't really need them because they don't support anything. But there is one rule, I would say. Anything that is attached to an especially powerful moment of love, connection with other people, or spirituality, those are the things that sustain us inwardly and outwardly. They bring about a memory of something that is very important for us to hold and keep with us. And a lot of other things, my problem is I'm a pragmatist. If it's possible to use it, I keep it, even if it hasn't been used in years. I have had to discipline myself to get rid of things I haven't used in years. And I'm rarely sorry. In fact, I rarely even remember that I owned it. The problem is I might buy it again. So, another question?
First, I'd like to say that I appreciate what you said about things, because the relationship I have with my things is that everything is sacred. And if something hasn't had much attention, it's like, oh, I'm sorry I haven't paid attention. It may be a dish, it may be something. I feel like maybe it's lonely, and I try to group things together so that they can have community. And then the other thing is that, especially one house that I lived in, I made it a practice. I would go out in the woods and I'd say, if any of the devas or elementals want to come to my home, come. And they did, and it was a delightful space in my home. And I had another home that I created with these devas and elementals. But what my concern is that when I left those homes, then what happened, because I went back to the homes and saw them afterwards, and people had cut down the bushes and the trees and, just gutted the place, but in my opinion. And I just wondered what happens when we leave a space that we've invested a lot of emotional energy in, and there are a lot of elementals and devas. What happens after we leave?
Okay, so two things. First of all, I want to thank you, as I thanked this individual here, for showing up and sharing, because now there's another person to check in with about cross connections for these inner sensibilities connected with devas and nature spirits. So Annie Besant said a very helpful thing. She said it in the context of loss that we experience with other human beings. I think it can be applied to any level that we've been talking about this morning. It is whenever the transition that we call death occurs, we need to understand that the form has been outworn and the life within it needs to be liberated into a larger life. So all the beings that shared your life with you in that space and with those things learned and grew with you and could not do that with the next group of people. They were liberated from the forms in which they inhabited, and then they probably, many of them, came with you because there was more learning and growth that could occur there. This is useful to think about with respect to deeply beloved pets, for example, or deeply beloved human beings that we're in the process of losing. So obviously this is a very large subject, but the idea is always to think about this transition called death or moving on, in essence, as a liberation from the form into a higher life.
Have you ever heard of the word egregore?
Yes.
Would you explain that to us, please?
This is a kind of elemental that embodies a mental plane thought form and will often be involved with groups of one kind. And in my experience, these egregores, this is not something you'll find in a book, but in my experience, they always have two poles, a higher pole and a lower pole. The higher pole is the angel that holds together the ideals of that organization, and the lower pole is the elemental that wants the organization to survive. And there needs to be a balance between the two. What I've noticed is people will be drawn to an organization because of the higher ideals, and then they'll overwork because they're possessed in a sense by the lower one that's trying to keep the organization going. And sometimes I've had to talk with people who become so exhausted as workers for a spiritual organization that they're almost immobilized, and it's really because the lower elemental has taken them over, and that there needs to be a boundary established there. As organizations dwindle in size, the survival one gets stronger and the ideals get less strong, and as a result, if I went to a particular church that I thought was interesting as a possible place to go with my partner to have some kind of shared spiritual life. And the whole time I was there, I was like, why am I getting money out of this? It wasn't flashy in any way. It was a rented space, And then at the end of all the good talk about all the good spiritual things, there was the passing of the hat. And a lot of pressure from that person about giving, but it was already present in the space from the egregore. So that person was being possessed by the survival egregore, element of the egregore. So with respect to the Theosophical Society, when I was presenting in Houston a few years ago, I talked about the positive and the negative ideas, and I talked about the higher ideals, and there was a wonderful feeling of energy in the room. And then I talked about when I wasn't sure when it was time for lunch, and I asked that question, and the whole space, 60 people, descended into complete chaos because no one had totally agreed on when the lunchtime would start. And so within a minute, we had gone from the higher pole to the lower pole. So anyway, they are things that definitely show up with respect to spiritual organizations.
My wife and I were visiting a waterfall in Oregon. And we were standing at the foot of the waterfall, and we felt this incredible presence there. It was a blessed presence. And I guess it was a deva. And since then, we've been kind of watching out for them. And we have a house, and my wife dreamed that she met somebody in one of her dreams up, I guess a deva, and led us to the house where we live. And we have incredible experiences in the garden. And what I wish is that it was okay to talk about these things.
It was okay to
talk about these things. Because by me saying this, it's kind of like, oh, wow, this guy's weird, And, but I feel that it's real, and I wish we could be more sensitive to them.
Yes.
And hopefully people can be more accepting of it.
Yes. I approached someone one time about whether she would like to join a class I was teaching. And she said to me, "I am so tired of being the weirdest person in the room." Okay, folks, I have to tell you, you're not the weirdest person in the room. Start showing up and talking to people about your inner experiences, and you will find a great deal of wonderful support. And if it's true that you're the weirdest person in the room, I want to know about it because I need to talk to you. I don't have enough weird people to talk to.
The conversation may have moved on at this point, but I had an experience. It's like in The Little Prince, the fox, in order to be tamed, had to be met at the same time every day for a period of time to be tamed. And when we lived in Kentucky, I had a very large garden. David loved expanding it. But I spent a lot of time in it, and the more time I spent, the more the little elementals enjoyed being there. And then when we had to move, I gave my last little tending to the garden and told them I had to move. And it's almost as if I felt them just all of a sudden say, "Okay, we're gone."
Thank you for that. I think that's the completion of the answer to Anne's comment, which is a lovely way to wrap things up this morning. And I just want to point out, we've moved in the direction of sharing our inner life in addition to everything else that we're accomplishing in the workshop. And I hope it feels pretty good to people.